Hello, students. Today we'll discuss a history passage in reading. This is passage 4 from the March 2021 US SAT QAS. So let's begin. This passage is adapted from a speech delivered in 1841 by Thomas Paul to the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. Let us do justice to an unfortunate people. Paul, a black abolitionist, worked with white abolitionist leader William Lloyd Garrison, who founded the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833. I've often asked myself what posterity would think of the strange contest in which the abolitionists are engaged. Here we meet time after time, newspapers are printed and speeches delivered to prove what? Why? That a man is a man and that he is the only human possessor of himself. But these propositions are self-evident propositions, and self-evident propositions we all know, though the most difficult to be proved, are the most easily understood because they need no proof. The mind sees their truth intuitively without the aid of reasoning. The attempt to prove them, therefore, would be ridiculous were it not for the consideration of the amazing state of delusion and vassalage to which prejudice reduces the mind when unenlightened by reason. So this first paragraph kind of introduces Paul's central point about the injustice, the inherent injustice of slavery, right? Slavery is a topic in American history that uh, it's called the original sin, right? Because it is inherent in the founding of the republic. It is right from the time the republic was founded, slavery was existent, and there's this great part of American history that deals with slavery and the end of slavery after the Civil War. And this is also something that you see very often on the SAT history passages. And a lot of times, the arguments in these passages, if it's a paired passage, one argument might ask for the continuation of slavery, one passage, and that would probably be a writer talking about the South, because slavery was this. There was a very clear demarcation between the North and the South in terms of attitudes to slavery, right? So so a lot of times when it's a passage on the Fugitive Slave Act or it's a passage like that, then one writer in a paired passage might ask for not defending slavery. I don't think even those writers would defend slavery, but they would probably couch it in terms of the sovereignty of the South and the right of the South to do as it pleases, right? And that the North should not interfere, right? And the second passage, which would be similar to the passage that we are reading, would be a very strong moral persuasive argument, right? It would be full of rhetorical techniques, which talks about the injustice of slavery itself, right? Every other consideration, the rights of the South, the sovereignty of the South, all of those pale before the injustice of slavery itself. And that is exactly what Paul is saying in this paragraph, that the things which are so self-evident as to be immediately understood are also a little hard to prove, right? And the only people to whom that proof is required to be shown are those who are in a state of delusion, who do not see the folly of their ways and who are unenlightened. The history of every age shows the truth of this assertion. At one time, we see Galileo thrown into prison by the Inquisition because he had made some discoveries and forced to purchase his liberty by retracting his opinions. When, therefore, we see the control which prejudice, aided by circumstances and encouraged by self interest, has in times past exercised over the human mind, and the tenacity with which it has held its deluded victims, stopping up the avenues of improvement, clipping the wings of genius, and retarding the progress of truth. When we see the minds whose energies have been crippled and whose sphere of action have been curtailed by its influence, when we see the tremendous power which reformers have brought to bear against the prevailing sins of the age in which they lived, the firm opposition they encountered, and the long and arduous struggles which preceded a better state of things, we are led by analogical reasoning to believe that the contest in which we are engaged is not an unnatural one, that it is not so dissimilar in its character and measures to others which have been carried triumphantly through, that the modern champions of freedom do not savor so much of quixotism, that is impracticality, as their traducers have represented, and that the unfortunate men whose cause they have espoused have as just a claim to humanity as their oppressors, and like them have been created a little lower than the angels. Okay, this is an interesting paragraph because it starts by bringing up Galileo's case, right? And we know that Galileo was the one who had come up with the model of the solar system that said that the sun was the center of the solar system and the planets revolved around it, right? And this model of the solar system is what ultimately proved to be true. But at the time, the church, which said that the Earth was the center of the solar system, it did not accept Galileo's assertions, and Galileo was put in prison for his views, and he had to retract them to gain his freedom. So the idea that a truth had to be retracted because it went against the received wisdom of the time is something that Paul brings up to kind of create an analogy with his own work in abolitionism, his own work to free blacks from the sin of slavery, right? And he says that if you look at the history of such struggles, then you notice that what we are doing today, what we are doing against slavery today, is not that much different from what people in the past, reformers in the past, have had to face when they wanted to change uh, the wisdom of the times, right? The wisdom that was incorrect, as Galileo did. And then he also says that that also tells me that my journey, my fight is not quixotic, it's not impractical, as the traducers have represented. Traducers is the other side, right? The people who belittle me, the people who make fun of me, as calling my quest impractical. I say to them that it's not impractical, and I I have I'm fighting for something that is just. I'm fighting for something that is true. I'm fighting for the equality of all men in the before the eyes of God. And the last line is particularly significant because he says that the the oppressed have a claim to humanity just as their oppressors do, and like them have been created a little lower than the angels, right? So to say that all of humanity is equal in the eyes of God, we are below God. We are equal before God and we are below God, right? So this idea of a hierarchy between the white man and the black man is unjust. How was it 5 years ago in regard to the question of slavery? A gloom hung over the moral atmosphere, which nothing seemingly could dissipate, save a miracle from God Himself. All saw, but no one durst expose his own breast. No one dared, I think. This is probably an anachronistic usage of dared, but no one dared expose his own breast to the pitiless peltings of the gathering storm. The pulpit and the press, instead of being faithful to their trust, were the panders to the general lust. But mind, like matter, must have its legitimate scope. There are always some spirits who will resist such unnatural domination, and such a spirit was found in the father of American anti slavery. In that hour, to he arose to cheer us on our gloomy pathway. I think the father here refers to Lloyd Garrison, right, who was introduced in the blurb. Um, the shafts of criticism and sarcasm and denunciation which rang against his buckler told only when he stood up unscathed in his moral and intellectual might and bearing down all opposition. The result is well known, nor does Mr. Garrison need any eulogy from me. So I think students tend to find history passages challenging because of a paragraph like this, right? One, obviously, it uses vocabulary that either they are not aware of or vocabulary that is not used today, right? For example, something like dust, I don't think it's used today. We use other words like dead, right? The other reason this is challenging is because it is rich in rhetorical uh, terminology, right? So let's just break it down line by line, right? So that it becomes easier to understand what exactly is Paul saying here. So he's saying, what was the situation with regard to slavery 5 years ago? A gloom hung over the moral atmosphere, right? So he's saying that the situation was quite pessimistic. It was quite, it was not something that we wanted. It was not something that we desired. The situation was something that put us in a gloom, right? Which nothing seemingly could dissipate save a miracle from God Himself. And it was hard to kind of get rid of that gloom. And why was that? So he'll explain that later. Why was the gloom all pervasive? That we felt that only an act of God could lift it. All saw it, but no one dared expose his own breast to the pitiless peltings of the gathering storm. So the gathering storm here refers to the slavery, support for slavery, right? There was support for slavery. Um, yeah, pitiless peltings of the gathering storm, right? So pitiless peltings is refers to the sort of beatings, the sort of merciless beatings of the gathering storm, which is the support for slavery. The environment around was supportive of slavery, and it was very difficult to fight it. The pulpit and the press. So, pulpit, I think, here refers to the church, right? And the press refers to the media. Instead of being faithful to their trust, were panderers to the general lust. So, even the church and the media, instead of kind of showing society, the right path, were also pandering, were also kind of following what was going on in the larger world, right? So this is to kind of suggest that there was very little hope for anybody who fought against slavery. There are always some spirits who will resist such unnatural domination, and such a spirit was found in the father of American anti-slavery. So I so here he refers to Lloyd Garrison and how Lloyd Garrison came up and he arose to cheer us on our gloomy pathway. The shafts of criticism and sarcasm which ran against his buckler or shield, which is to say, which ran against his views, which ran against his propositions, told only when he stood up unscathed in his moral and intellectual might and bearing down all opposition. So the rest of the paragraph basically shows that that gloom was lifted when the father of American anti-slavery, Lloyd Garrison, came up and he uh, cited views, or he answered to this support for slavery with his very strong anti-slavery views. The task of a reformer is far from being an agreeable one. The hidden springs which are to be touched by him and set into motion are not discernible to common eyes, and if they were, few would know how to approach or dare to meddle with them. He scatters his truths among the body politic, and the effect is electrical. He is greeted at once with smiles and frowns, with blessing and cursing, with eulogy and abuse. So, eulogy is praise, right? Now he's almost stifled with the caresses of devoted friends, and anon he's exposed to the fury of a bloodthirsty mob. Anon, I think, refers to anonymous. So when he's with friends, he feels that he's almost stifled with their love and devotion. But when he's alone, he could be exposed to the fury of a bloodthirsty mob. So this kind of brings out the dichotomy of being against slavery, that you receive love and gratitude from slaves, from black men, but you also open yourselves to criticism and violence from supporters of slavery, right? But if it is a melancholy to see some run mad, we have the gratification to behold others restored to their reason. Much may depend upon accidental circumstances for the success of the reformer, but more depends upon himself. In him are found the great qualities of the head and heart. For the burden of proof is upon him, and he is to answer cavils, refute sophistry, and prove his propositions, while slanderers are crucifying his reputation, and assassins are aiming deadly daggers at his heart. All moral reformations have been attended with more or less persecution, but the American abolitionists stand preeminently distinguished in this respect. Is that the end? Yes. Okay, so this again talks about task of the reformer, right? And the task of the reformer with respect to not just Paul himself, but with respect to Garrison, right? Because he is introduced as the reformer in the previous paragraph. So he has a double responsibility, right? He has to kind of bring up his views, bring up his very natural views into a society, into the public domain where he could be criticized or worse, right? He could be killed for his views. So, but the positive side is that he could also change minds, right? He could also bring some former supporters of slavery to see how unjust that institution is, right? So he's kind of saying that the reformer does has to be very careful, right? He needs to be careful when he takes up this task because he will face petty objections, he will face falsehoods. You see, the meanings of these difficult words are given so that you can understand the passage better. His reputation would be crucified, would be demolished, and he could also face violent threats, right? All reformers have faced persecution, as the case of Galileo brings up. But in regard to anti slavery, abolitionists stand preeminent, which is to say that the kind of persecution they face is perhaps unmatched in history, right? So, good passage, difficult passage. Let's try and understand if we can answer the questions. Question 32. According to the passage, the author considers the campaign of the abolitionists to be strange because it requires them to. Let's just quickly read that. I have often asked myself what posterity would think of the strange contest in which the abolitionists are engaged. Yeah, so I think he refers to it as strange because he's trying to prove something that seems self evident, right? So it's not something that he has. If somebody really looked into their heart, they would know that slavery is unnatural, it is unjustified. So, because it requires them to predict how future generations will judge their efforts, persuade others of a truth that should be very obvious, right? So, B is the right answer, right? It's strange because it's a very obvious truth, and so the requirement to persuade others is strange. Provide evidence that links slavery to the general lack of enlightenment, and propose a course of action that is counter to the beliefs of the audience. So you can very clearly see that A, C, and D are not supported by the passage because B is very directly stated there. Okay, 33 and 34 is an evidence pair. The authors suggest that abolitionists' persuasive methods will have to take into account their opponent's inability to comprehend. Okay, so I think because there were so many arguments made in the passage, it would be a good idea to actually work with line numbers 3 to 6, 6 to 10, 10 to 12, and 12 to 16. So they would have to deal with the fact that their opponents are unable to comprehend logic, appeal to emotion, challenge to authority, and political rhetoric. Okay, so 3 to 6 says here we meet time after time. Newspapers are printed and speeches delivered to prove what? Why that a man is a man. Yeah, so this is not really talking about opponents, so I'll not consider this. But these propositions are self-evident, and self-evident propositions, though are the most easily understood because they need no proof. Okay, the mind sees their truth intuitively without the aid of reasoning. Uh, yeah, the attempt 10 to 12. The attempt to prove them, therefore, would be ridiculous. Okay, 10 to 12 is done. 12. The attempt to prove them, therefore, would be ridiculous were it not for the consideration of the amazing state of delusion and vassalage to which prejudice reduces the mind when unenlightened by reason. Without the aid of reasoning, right? You don't really need and delusion and vassalage to which prejudice reduces the mind when unenlightened by reason. So I think he's talking about logical arguments, right? Because he's saying unenlightened by reason, which would mean logic. He's not really talking about emotion here. The mind sees without the aid of reason. Just to which prejudice? Yeah, prejudice. I'm going with logical arguments because it's unenlightened by reason. So I'm going with A and I'm going with D, right? Because I don't think he talks about an appeal to emotion, right? He doesn't really say that here. He talks about, you would think that he would talk about an appeal to emotion, but he doesn't, because he actually talks about the idea that slavery is unjust as being self-evident, um, and and the fact that they need no proof, right? But if somebody is unenlightened by reason, uh, then it kind of reinforces their prejudice. Okay. A central claim in the passage is that public resistance to a cause delays the progress of justice by discouraging reformers. That seems right, because there is this big description here which talks about 5 years ago, there was this idea that everything was against us. Everything was against us abolitionists. And so it kind of discouraged us, right? Yeah. So we'll come back to that. Garrison is unlike more reformers that he has been willing to endure constant criticism and abuse. So that's not correct, because that's been the history of most reformers. Reformers face significant challenges in addressing the social injustices of their eras, and slavery is harder to eliminate than other forms of oppression because the press has stifled abolitionist voices. I don't think that's a main claim. So B and D are out. I'm kind of wondering between A and C. Um, I like A, but I also like C because he does say that, right? The tenacity with which it has deluded victims. Yeah, it's an. Yeah, I'm going with C. I think C is like a better central claim than A. Yeah, A is mentioned later, but it's not. Uh, I think it's mentioned more in the context of introducing Garrison. It's not a central claim, while C is like this entire passage, this entire paragraph, the second paragraph, which talks about. So I'm leaning towards C. Okay. Which statement best describes the method the author employs in the second paragraph to present his argument? Okay, so he kind of uses a lot of rhetorical questions. Yeah. Okay, let's read the options. He accounts for the presence of prejudice by citing a general historical principle. He explains the current situation by drawing a parallel to past reformers' experiences. Yeah, B sounds good. He shows that a traditional criticism of past reformers is not applicable. He disproves the charges made against his fellow reformers by illustrating their moral. So I think B is quite obviously the right answer, because uh, he talks about the history of every struggle, the history of every social struggle, and how this struggle, the struggle against slavery, is not so dissimilar in its character, uh, right? And so we should believe that So he explains the current situation by drawing a parallel to past reformers' experiences, right? Yeah. I'm not very happy with prejudice in A. I don't think prejudice was really operative in Galileo's case. Mm, yeah, so B is very clearly the right answer here. Um, and C is not correct because he wants to say that those are analogies, the past and the present. Yeah, and he doesn't really talk about moral superiority here. Okay. What about 37? The description of Galileo's experiences in lines 18 to 21 primarily serves to, okay, encourage the audience to appreciate the contribution of an earlier reformer, introduce an alternative explanation for the pervasive prejudice in society, caution the audience about the dangers of espousing, illustrate a preceding generalization about the effects of ignorance. Okay, so let's kind of look at 18 to 21. The history of every age shows the truth of this assertion. At one time, we see Galileo thrown into prison and forced to purchase, when therefore we see the control which prejudice, aided by circumstance and encouraged by self, has in times past exercise over the mind. I'm kind of now getting general history. I'm like looking at 36 again now. Yeah, no, 36 was fine. I just thought, why not A again? Because I saw the word prejudice there. But I'm not sure that it's a general historical principle. It actually is a general historical principle. Does he pass? But he also does B, right? He does bring up that. I think B is better than A, right? Because see, he does bring up prejudice. A is what starts the paragraph, but I think the purpose of the second paragraph is B, right? Because the idea is to kind of use that prejudice, use that historical precedent to talk about what is happening with slavery. Okay, now 37, he introduced an alternative explanation. Okay, I'm really liking B for this because he says, he made some discoveries, and there is the control which prejudice encourage is it an alternative explanation? No, I don't think it's so. B is not correct. Yeah, it's D. Yeah, this was a good question. Okay. Illustrate a preceding generalization. What is that generalization? The history of every age shows the truth of this assertion. That is the generalization, and it's illustrating that generalization with Galileo's experience. It's not really to encourage Galileo's contributions, right? That's not the point. I'm still coming back to 36. I'm kind of stuck between A and B. But I still think B is better because it kind of, this is what the paragraph's aim is, right? Because this is, see, I like A as, because it begins the paragraph, but this entire thing, right? What reformers face, that is important because he draws a parallel. So I'll go with B. Okay. 38 and 39 is an evidence pair. The passage most strongly suggests that a society dominated by prejudice most likely has which effect on its members. They readily become inspired. They are prevented from reaching. They most commonly feel discouraged. They readily become. Yeah, I think C, right? But we'll go with the line numbers. 21 to 30, 30 to 35, 47 to 51, and 53 to 58. Okay. Yeah, because I think this comes in this paragraph, right? This paragraph. So I'm already leaning towards the last two options. A gloom hung over the moral atmosphere, which nothing seemingly could dissipate, save a miracle from God Himself. All saw it, but no one dared expose his breast to the pitiless peltings. And 53 to 58. But mind, like matter, must have its legitimate scope. Yeah, all saw it, but no one dared expose his breast to the. Okay, so because of this, Yeah, it'll be C. 38 is C, and 39 is also C. Because see, why is that the case? Because it says here, uh, here, right? All saw it, all saw the the way slavery was defended, but no one dared expose his own press to the pitiless peltings of the gathering storm. But they were scared to speak up against it, which is why a reformer is important, because a reformer brings courage and he brings the voice of justice into a society, right? So they feel discouraged and frightened. Okay, right. In context, the phrase "as their traducers have represented" uh, more strongly suggests that I'm just kind of, yeah, just give me 1 second. I really like to follow the chronology of the passage, so I'm just quickly going to look at 21 to 30 and 30 to 35. 21 to 30. Yeah, okay, I'm going to come back to 38 and 39. I want to read options A and B of 39. Okay, so let me just write that. 21 to 30 and 30 to 35. The reason I'm doing that is because the next question references lines 41 to 42. So I just thought I should maybe pay attention to these lines as well, because the questions are in the same chronology as the passage. Okay, so yeah, let me just put this here. So what is 21 to 30 saying? When we see the control with prejudice, improvement. Yeah. Okay. So reaching, yeah, B. 38 is B and 39 is A. Sorry for the confusion, because the reason this is the best answer is because it's talking about a society dominated by prejudice, right? It was my mistake not to read options A and B of 39. It was a society dominated by prejudice, right? I should also read 30 to 35 though. That's about reformers, so that's fine. That's not relevant. So I know that 39C and 38C work together, but I think those only work in the context of abolition, right? Because that's what he talks about here. He talks about a gloom hangover with respect to slavery, while the question is about society in general, right? Not just in respect to slavery. So if the question had been about slavery and anti-slavery, then C and C would be fine. But because it's about society in general, then A and is it B and A? B and A would be better, because that's what the general uh, effect on society of prejudice is discussed. Okay, this is a good passage, and these are hard questions, and you have to be really careful. I must say that I was forced to come back and look at 38 and 39. I was very sure of my initial answer, but I was forced to come back because I saw lines 41 to 42 in question 40, and I had a feeling that I had gone ahead with my answers in the previous question, which means I was probably not right, because the question's chronology generally follows the passage chronology, right? Okay, so then this is 40 now. In context, the phrase "as their traducers have represented" more strongly suggests that opponents to abolition concealed, became symbols, distorted the truth, and misinterpreted it. So I think it's C, right? Because what are the traducers doing? The traducers are calling the quest for finishing slavery impractical. Modern champions of freedom do not savor so much of quixotism as their traducers have represented. Right? So it's not they have distorted the truth. It's not an event, right? I know that D might look like a good answer, but it's not an event. It's the truth of fighting against slavery, right? So I'll go with C. Hmm. The author's attitude towards Gaddison is deep admiration, cheerful gratitude, mild impatience, grave. So C and D are definitely wrong. Uh, I would go with A, right? A is better than B because he is thankful, I'm sure, but uh, it's more about the admiration. Admiration comes across more. It's the I don't think the gratitude is something that is explicitly mentioned. So I'm going with A for this. At once in line 71. Okay. He scatters his truths among the body politic. He is greeted at once with smiles and frowns, with at once with. I think because it's opposite, smiles and frowns, blessing. So simultaneously, right? Simultaneously, because there is positive and negative. So A. Okay, this was a confusing set of questions, right? I think the passage was quite straightforward, even if a little hard, but the questions were confusing, and I'm kind of now wondering if I did well, right? Um, yeah, but I think we did okay, I would say, especially because I'm glad I corrected 38 and 39. Okay, but let's go ahead and look at our answers. This goes from 32 to 42. Okay, so let's do that. 32 BA, okay, 42. DCBD, DCBD, BACAA, BACA. Okay, great. Oh, I'm so glad we did well on this. Okay, so you see how this passage was attempted. I I think there are a lot of things that go into getting the history passage correct, right? One obviously is to get a good understanding of the passage itself. And if you're struggling with that, spend more time with history passages. I'll be doing a lot more on this channel, so come back and uh, attempt some with me. I think it's important not to get stuck on particular phrases or particular sentences because that can really influence uh, your ability to understand, right? So I would say try and understand meanings from context, but don't get stuck. Try and keep moving in the passage, and always try and focus on the main idea of every paragraph and the passage overall, right? Also, I think be very open to changing your answers, particularly in history passage. You saw we did that a couple of times here because and be open to the idea of the questions following the chronology of the passage because all of these things go into choosing the right answer. Right, so I think we'll stop here for now. Please subscribe to the channel if you found this video useful and spread the word. I'll see you guys soon with more practice. Bye-bye.